really envy you this conversation, Łukasz, and it's such an important voice, and it's such an important conversation, especially that we're dealing with a sort of phenomenon called the illusion of inclusion. So the data says or shows that around 60% of leaders are facing the challenge of evaluating their inclusion level. So 60% either overestimate or underestimate their levels of inclusion. So the tool that we've provided to people, the free tool that we have granted to all the change makers, is now available. So we strongly encourage everyone to just take a test and see where they are. Any comments from your side, Łukasz?
Absolutely. I would add that before I introduce you to my two wonderful CEOs, mind you, joining our conversation coming up next, I would definitely encourage you to learn more about not just Jennifer Brown's personal experience. Initially, she wanted to be an opera singer, and after 5 years of running her own consultancy, she pivoted towards DEI for a reason. You can find a lot of interesting content. Ironically enough, one of the first speeches I heard from Jennifer Brown was that of a TEDx talk 11 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And why ironically? Because it happened in Springfield. What a name. We all know the name of the place. And now we can proceed to talk about trends, perspectives, and challenges in our international conversation. So let us welcome Jana Tikalova, representing OPIM. Hello, good morning.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. We have Anna Zaroda-Dąbrowska, Diversity Hub. Welcome.
Hello, nice to meet you.
You can learn about the two organizations respectively. Just visit the websites, visit the social media. They both have insightful, beautifully packaged content on both websites. And you would think that the two countries, because we are neighbors, Poland and Czech Republic, would be very, very similar. So the question arises, why talk about the two neighbors so close to each other, given that the countries are so close geographically, economically? But before we get there, let me ask you this. Why do you do what you do in your life professionally? Jana, would you like to start?
You're looking at me, so I will answer first. So simple, because it does still make sense what I do.
Mm-hmm. You're deeply on the motivational level, right?
Over 20 years, and I haven't given up. And still, it does make sense, and I can see the progress. So even more, I am motivated to really help and support the change.
Wonderful. Thank you. Anna?
For me, personally, I was always looking for the sense in my life, not only in private life, but also in what I do professionally. So this is a kind of field when I really may realize myself, and also which gives me a lot of satisfaction, because I know and I see that I'm doing a good thing and right thing, not only supporting business and creating working environment which is better for people, but also we do it for ourselves. We are becoming better people with diversity and inclusion.
Thank you very much for the opening perspective. Thank you, Anna. Before we proceed to the first really tough question, we started this conference by saying it's the very first edition where we have a proper audience in the studio. So there's only one way to prove it to you before you show you the actual audience and talk to them. Let's have a round of applause for this conversation so that you can all hear it. And no, we had not pre-recorded any applause and added it to the soundtrack. First question. Looking back at your experience in the DEI conversation in your respective countries, Poland and Czech Republic, over those 10, 15, 20 years, what would be the top 5 trends in those conversations? And were they somehow surprising, interesting from your perspective? Who would like to start?
I can start. Looking into the Czech landscape, so I'll name few ongoing challenges. The first one is something so-called maternity wall. We actually have one of the biggest parental leave, which is up to 4 years. So imagining what it happens when there are 2 children. And the problem is, for instance, the nursery, so children up to 2 years. Until the year 2013, they were nurseries, but they were completely shut down. So that's like one of the biggest challenge. The other challenge, which I think we share really commonly with Poland and also other European countries, is the lack of women in senior positions. So for instance, for the Czech Republic, there are only 17% of women in the executive roles. In Poland, just for an interest, it's around 23%. And with that, it goes another challenge, which is the glass ceiling or the glass elevator, the gender pay gap. So out of interest, in 2008, there was, for Czech Republic, 21%, the gender pay gap. And in 2023, we reduced it, but not really enormously, because it was around 16.4%. And out of interest, Poland did much better. The gender pay gap was around 4.9, almost 5%. And maybe another challenge that I would like to highlight, and it is, I feel more and more the issue and more the challenge, is the LGBTQ plus sensitivity. Still, I have a recent study from the Czech Republic, and there's around 31% of LGBTQ plus people that are discriminated or bullied in the workplace. 50% they don't come up and reveal their orientation. So I could name more, but I think this is for the start.
So, as Jennifer would have put it, there's a lot of covering going on because the social stigma and social pressure is still going on. So it's a long fight, in a sense.
It is, but on the other hand, the businesses are progressing. It is slow in the retrospect of last 20 years, but. I could name also a few things, like when the DEI came to Czech Republic, so there was a lot of challenge being too global, so the challenge to really localize the DEI initiatives and targets, and it was coming from the bottom to the top, which luckily is changing. Like last 2 years, I can see really progress, that it is a topic not to be put into the drawer, but really something that the leadership is taking seriously on board.
It sounds like Czech Republic is keeping you really, really busy across the landscape.
Luckily, yes, and finally, but I see it is like still slow.
Fair enough. Thank you, Jana. Anna?
And what in Poland, I can say from my perspective, I personally work on a strategic level, implementing diversity and inclusion strategies and policies, and working with people who are responsible for aligning D&I with business strategy. So I would point out 3 challenges we are facing nowadays. It's first, translating global policies to local grounds. I will maybe develop more minute after about that, because this is, in my opinion, related to the local specifics we have, our social grounds we have, and our readiness, I would say, and real openness for diversity and inclusion, which is not, or the level of that readiness is not uneven everywhere. So we have a lot of excess of divisions, which makes that discussion very, very complicated and complex. A second thing, inclusive leadership. We mentioned, I think we are talking about that every year, about frozen middle. So that middle is still frozen. So I don't see we do a lot to defreeze it. And of course, we see, especially in training, we see a trend, a growing trend of interest in inclusive leadership trainings and development programs, and it's very, very fine. but still I don't see a commitment of companies to implement or put D&I on the agenda of evaluation of managers. So until we don't have it, we will have a lot of problems with building inclusive environment and making that real change. Number 3 for me also referred to awareness, linking D&I with business strategy. And I think that Jennifer mentioned a bit that we understand diversity and inclusion differently on different levels. We work on different maps. But the most important thing, in my opinion, is that we usually don't see the link with the business. So we cannot understand that diversity and inclusion is a real business process, and we can benefit on that.
Mm-hmm. I think especially that part is still really missing. Everyone repeats this as a common phrase, as a buzzword, so to say.
Buzzword, or I see working with top managers or, for example, boards in many companies, then that when we start discussing and translating diversity into business language and trying to link it with their business strategies and business aims, they are opening their eyes. Wow, yeah, this is the point when we want to start talking about that.
Thank you very much for this dynamic intro that sets the tone for what's coming next. We have guests joining us from 6 countries, including you, across continents and time zones. We'll start with Nikki Lanier, Harper Slate founder and CEO. Let's listen. Nikki Lanier, founder and CEO at Harper Slate, is joining us now. Hello, Nikki.
Hi, nice to see you.
It's wonderful to have you with us, and I really look forward to hear your perspective along with the guests of our conference. Would you be so kind to introduce yourself first? Tell us something about your perspective, because you've been all over the American media, but how do you see yourself in the context of the topic of this conference?
I'm a thought leader and a strategist that really helps organizations understand deeply what must be true of those companies, of the ethos of the character and the culture in order to assure multiculturalism can really thrive, and that multi-generational workplaces can really take root.
Wonderful. I couldn't have hoped for a better perspective than thought leadership and strategy, because that's the very question that we are asking you, and that is current DEI landscape. What are the first things that come to your mind when you think about it? And a major shift or just organic growth or developments? What is it now?
There's definitely been shifting, if I'm honest, all along. So the DEI is not a new construct, at least in the US. It's been around for years and years, and yet it grew into a different kind of emphasis, with different emphasis after 2020. And what we saw when it came out, reimagined in 2020, was much more infrastructure, much more focus, much more effort on responding to what we thought was a crisis, in my opinion, a crisis that we all kind of had to sit and observe in our living rooms during COVID. And I think companies had a genuine desire to do something, but didn't realize that the intricacies of the D and the E and the I work would be as disruptive and fairly intrusive and dissonance resetting. And so what we saw coming out in 2020 was a lot of energy and a lot of focus. And then over the years, I would say we've seen somewhat of a malaise setting in, somewhat of concerns about both the doctrine itself and how it came to be practiced, what it feels like to be in a space where DEI is bandied about, and then the actual content felt like it was overwhelming, I believe, for a lot of folks. And so currently, we're just
so it's not a question of just Yeah, it's not just a question of proportions, is it? Or the narrative. What is it? What's the major challenge here, Nikki?
Well, I do. I think that there is some narrative. I think there's some misalignment around context. So those two things, let me just dive in that really quickly. So the narrative, uh, it is important that DEI be constructed much like any other change management movement. It has its own discipline. Change management is an infrastructure. It's a skill. It's a talent. And a lot of folks were thinking about doing this work, practicing in this space without, in my opinion, the benefit of change management. And so then you just use words that are emotionally reckless. We don't use words at my company like white fragility, white supremacy, anti-racism, woke. Like, we don't use those words in corporate settings specifically because they just fall flat. And to be blunt, corporations, capitalist systems don't know what to do with those words. We also don't set this inside of a context that has anything to do with social justice or a right thing to do. We talk about the demographic trends. We talk about the inevitability of the browning of the country. We talk about the realities that women will still hold majority, right? That means the people that you're going to be courting to do your work and the people that you're going to be selling your goods and products to are ever more coming from communities that you understand the least. And so the way we talked about it and where we sat the doctrine inside of companies, I think helped to contribute to some of the malaise that we're experiencing today.
You used two interesting words. One was obviously the doctrine, which you have repeated, and the other one was this gradual development of perception of DEI itself. You mentioned overwhelmed, feeling of overwhelmed. So
feels about them and determining to what extent we can activate and amplify the talent that we need, i.e. the burgeoning majority talent that we need. Those will always be needs, even if we don't have the desire, which I think we're slipping away from us, that actual desire to do the work. And so, in the US, we just came off the heels of this election. And not only do we have a new president coming in, but we have
the whole world has noticed.
Fun fact, we've got a new president coming, right? You may not have noticed. But he is ushering in. Yeah. It's tough. It's tough on this doctrine and this work. He's ushering in with him a character set, a persona that has ignited a firestorm of ire around the DEI incantation. So this particular incantation, D and E and I as it is. And so what I think the challenges that are going to be before us, listen, I've had clients this morning. We have strategic sessions on what are we going to call DEI without calling it DEI. That becomes the conversations now. How do we advance what we know is going to be important around building multicultural teams and strategies, going into markets and connecting with people deeply that we just don't know how to? We need to know what to call that so that we can be about the business of effectuating that. And so now what we see is a lot of folks who do what I do are pivoting to really determine not only like silly things, seem silly to me, like what are we going to call what we do to hide it, right? How do we nestle this? But I think, the worry is this going to go away? Am I somehow going to be penalized for trying to do what I think will help make sure my organization is competitive, will help us make sure that we have employee engagement strategies that are really speaking to the kinds of employee, the ethos, the character, the needs, and the idiosyncrasies and the nuances of the employees that we will have to court and retain. I don't know how to do that, employers are telling me. I want to know how, but I can't learn it in the context of a D and an E and an I. So what we've done, help employers think, well, this has always been our strategy, if I'm honest. We've always seen diversity and inclusion as the employee engagement strategic imperative of our lifetime. Because as you're bringing in greater representation of difference, and you're also asking that difference to be fully ignited and activated in work, that's an employee engagement strategy, because you want that ignition so that they can give the best of their discretionary effort, which leads to more innovation, which leads to more innovative organization. Every company wants that. So the diversity and inclusion work is your employee engagement work. And then we talk about equity work as a pathway to really building robust workforce development pipelines. So my guidance has been to employers then and now and evermore henceforth, nestle the principles of this work inside of strategies that you're already promulgating, and using language that your employees, your leaders, and your board are already familiar with, so that the work doesn't have to feel as jarring as it has in the past, and it doesn't dilute the potency or the effectiveness of your path forward.
You've touched on some really fascinating points, Nikki, and we have also run out of time, believe it or not, sad as it makes me. But before I ask you to leave us with a closing remark, closing diagnosis or recommendation, let me just paraphrase what you said, because it sounds like you feel that even the acronym itself has somehow exhausted its positive potential. And in the past, the challenge was to address internal resistance from employees, from companies, people who find it difficult to relate to the doctrine, as you call it. But now it sounds like the attack, if you like, is coming from the outside. It's more systemic, it's more derogatory, it's more stigmatizing. So I suppose the challenge is to rethink really deep how you communicate DEI. Whether you use the acronym or not is a separate issue, but certainly creating a new acronym doesn't solve the root cause problem here, does it?
No. And it's a sad exercise, because it really isn't about the nomenclature, and has never been. But to the extent that the nomenclature now is its own impediment, I'm 100% convinced that jettison it, get rid of it, because it never was about the letters to begin with. It's always been about how do we position our organizations, our world, our families, even our communities, to become what we must, understanding the inevitability of the demographic shifts that are before us. And we have to have viable countries, viable companies, viable communities, and viable families that are embracing what is to come, and not necessarily just focused on what is currently.
And the thing also about acronyms is that people sooner or later grow tired about them, and it's also quite easy to attack them as ideology or to use some kind of label for that. Nikki, it's been an absolute pleasure. I wish we had more time, but thank you for finding the time to join us. Thank you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
It really was fascinating to talk to Nikki. I do wish we had more time, and who knows, maybe for the 10th edition we'll have more time for a more in-depth
I wonder what letters we would discuss then.
We'll see about that. We have 1 year to figure it out, I suppose.
The whole alphabet of DEI, of inclusion.
I don't think our audience does need a warm-up, but let's risk one. May I ask you to think, we're talking in this panel about perspectives, trends, and challenges. I want you to think of 3 words, or maybe even just one, that come to your mind first as the most important words. I will approach you with a microphone in a moment, just to give me 1 or 3 words. When you think about these 3 things, perspectives, trends, challenges for the future in this conversation. In the meantime, any impressions, Jana, Anna, based on Nikki and maybe earlier also Jennifer's contribution?
Yeah. I would refer to Nikki and to those letters. For me, well, I agree and don't agree, to be honest. Because I agree with Nikki that we really need to focus what is behind those letters, right? This is the most important thing.
Which was one of
But-
the questions. Anna,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah, I
You
saw
noticed.
it. Yeah,
Someone
I
asked
know.
about-
And I'm going to that. Yeah, also to that question. But as I work, I see it's very helpful framework, especially for those people and those companies which are not on the level of fully understanding what is it about. So then if we focus on letters and we focus on D, for example, and stop there, then we are discussing about our traits, and then we are talking about what are our differences, what differ us, not what are the bridges between us and how we can build on that. So this is one thing. The second, there was a question appeared here on the screen. Why don't we back to basics, and why don't we stop talking about our features, our traits, gender, age, abilities or disabilities, ethnical background, and so on and so forth? And why don't we start talking about that we are humans? That we are humans, and this is to make us happy, to make us feel better, to make us build better relationships in the workplace and also in our private life. So this is what is inclusion about. So my personal view is that I needed those letters to frame and trying to understand and trying to explain the concept. But I agree that if we are focusing only on that, then we start discussing on what is not so important. So we have diversity, D, E, I, B sometimes. Now we have G for justice, Jedi, EDI, IDE. Well, it's not about that. It's about what is behind.
Thank you, Anna. Jana?
Thank you. Actually, I also noticed that question, and going back to the basics, my career started in the Council of Europe, where I was the human rights educator. And actually, the whole concept of diversity and inclusion is so much embedded and linked to the human rights. And human rights is for all. So I try, as well as it should be the inclusion. When I work with the clients, I more speak about the psychological safety, and when I speak to the board of directors, top managers, yes, let's use these words because you need to do some reporting. Maybe you have it in your KPIs, let's be transparent about it. But there are different narratives for different group of employees. And the word as such, diversity, it's the same in Czech and Polish, and it is like the new word for some employees. Let's try not to use it. And I agree, the DEI is giving the framework, but it is not applicable for everyone. So we need to be really careful how to communicate it. And I think it will be a catastrophic that what Nikki was saying, that her question is how they will name it differently, or we cannot even use these letters. So it will be catastrophic that we will face that challenge in our region. So I really try in my consulting and training to go step by step, baby steps, and really be very careful and sensitive with communication around the whole concept of D&I.
Thank you, Jana. If you remember the metaphor that together with Basia we've started with, the metaphor of a large, massive table surrounded by stakeholders engaging in this DEI conversation for, let's say, the past decade, and all of a sudden, much more powerful voices entering the discussion, with much more significant audiences internationally. Does it change the debate? And perhaps the easiest way to illustrate it, if you remember my conversation with Jennifer, talking about the word woke. If a word, like just one word, can change its connotations drastically from very positive, attuned to human sensitivity, empathy, tolerance, to extremely negative and derogatory in less than a decade, it's probably easy to imagine that so can an acronym, whether it's DEI, DNI, DEIB, whichever we go for. Right, we have very little time, but we'll come back to those words that best describe perspectives, trends, and challenges. But we want to start it now. Anyone, please raise your hand if you'd like to say your word that first comes to mind. Give it a try. Raise your hand. We already have someone.
Hello. I have two words. Creative tension.
Creative tension. Very good one. Anyone else like to contribute?
Authenticity.
Thank you. Anyone else on this side? Before I go to the dangerous right side of things.
Navigating polarization.
Very smart. I mean, it will be very difficult to beat those people. Anyone else? Yeah, shall we go to the right side? Super interesting. So we can definitely say that one of the key words would be tension, interaction, the dynamic of it. Anyone would like to add on the right side? Nothing? Nothing at all? Thank you so very much. I suppose this next voice joining us now, Taz Latif. I will hand over now to Basha, who will lead the conversation. Listen carefully, it's fascinating. Enjoy.
Well, hello, good morning and good afternoon, Taz. Great to have you on board, and I'm very happy to have this conversation with you. Before we even start, let me ask how you're doing today. How is everything?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you for asking. Good. London. I'm based in London, so it's a little bit chilly here. We had some snow last week, so we might have a white Christmas. Who knows? But other than that, yeah, I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Thank you so much. I'm also good, and weather-wise, similar situation. Although today is quite a warm day. So, but yes, winter is coming. Winter is coming, so cannot be changed. So yes, anyways, thank you so much for joining the conversation and the conference. Great to have you. Before we hit the three questions, I would like to introduce you to the audience, our fantastic audience. So Taz is the head of DEI and community for Startup Discovery School. She's a fantastic woman doing multiple things, being both a leader and educator. And Taz, in your work specifically, you talk a lot about and you focus specifically on the power of community, sustainable change, generations, activism, social impact, which resonates with me greatly. And I would hope we would take your perspective and take all these angles in our conversation now, as we will be kind of analyzing the DEI landscape for the UK and Europe market. So I'm very curious to hear your perspective on the subject. Sounds good?
Sounds good to me. I'm looking forward to speaking and sharing some thoughts and things that are in my brain right now.
Will be fine. Okay, so let's start with where we are, and let's try to analyze the current state of DEI for UK and Europe market. So if I could ask you to just bring your perspective onto what's happening, what are you observing, and what may be the shaping trends for the UK and Europe market. Let's start with that.
Sure. Yeah. So the DEI landscape, I'd say, across sort of Western Europe and the UK, for me, has been a mix of progress, which is obviously a good thing, innovation, which is brilliant, but also persistent systemic barriers as well. So if we look at laws and legislation as an example, the UK Equality Act, which was established in 2010, that for me, I think, continues to serve as probably one of the most comprehensive, well-rounded anti-discrimination laws in the world. And it covers everything from age to gender to sexual orientation and disability. Doesn't mean that everyone does a good job of implementing it within their companies, but it does exist and it is there as a foundation. And then across the EU, we have initiatives like the Gender Equality Strategy, aiming to improve gender balance in leadership, enforce transparency in pay. And these frameworks have really laid a foundation for DEI to thrive. But here's the truth. Many companies are really struggling to translate that compliance piece into meaningful cultural change. And, I looked at this study recently by PwC that found just 18% of European companies felt that their DEI strategies were mature or well integrated into their businesses. So less than 1 in 5 companies felt that, which is it shows we have a lot of work to do, I think. And the other thing for me in terms of the landscape is I think there's a generational shift in expectations. Without giving away my age, I think Gen Z and millennials are pushing for more than just token representation. They want real change. They want companies to actually stick to their word. And I think there's a growing emphasis on underrepresented groups, like those with neurodivergent individuals, employees from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So I think these are the less visible diversity traits that don't often get talked about. Things like class, socioeconomic background, if someone is living with ADHD. So these aren't always fully addressed because the most visible ones tend to be things like race and gender sometimes. So I think this is one of the growing trends for me as well across the landscape.
Okay. So interestingly, what you just shared is one, there have been some changes, like systemic changes. That's one. And there's a social movement. So a lot of indicators that we have progressed within the DI world. Yet there are still some challenges, right? There are still some challenges, and business is facing probably a lot of challenges. So despite of the broader picture and the signals of the positives of some successes, as we could say, we are still struggling. So what would you say from your perspective are the key challenges for 2025? And I'm asking specifically about challenges because I think it's important for businesses across sectors and across the locations to prepare for what's coming and to build a proper readiness level. So, what are the challenges that need special attention from business, from your perspective?
Yeah. For sure. So I think I'll cover 3 challenges that I see coming up in 2025. I think the first one is DEI fatigue. The momentum that we saw in 2020, undeniably, it has slowed down. Movements like Black Lives Matter, post the murder of George Floyd, this event ignited global conversations. But my experience of it has been, and across the DEI landscape, many companies are now just retreating into performative gestures, doing great marketing campaigns for particular hard to reach communities, but there's nobody from that community employed within their business. Very performative things. So I think that's leading to a lot of burnout. I looked at HR Review recently, and 67% of DEI professionals across Europe are stating that they feel unsupported by their organizations and are often having to, fix problems that are arising as they are. That phrase, it's like trying to build a car as you're trying to drive the car as you build it. So I feel like this is what a lot of the challenge we're facing, and the fatigue is coming from the fact that we're trying to implement solutions into problems that are still continuing, with new problems being thrown onto us. And I think without, sustained energy and real investment into DEI professionals, there's a real risk of progress slowing down. So yeah, I guess the analogy I would use is, signing up for a marathon, for example. We're all really excited at the start, and everyone's energy is there, and you've got your water, and you've bought a marathon outfit, and you're ready to go. And then by about mile 10, everyone slows down a little bit. We're kind of looking for snacks. Does anybody have a protein bar or energy bar? So that's the first challenge. I think I see it coming up in 2025. We're already seeing it in 2024. The second challenge I would say is navigating intersectionality in what I feel has become a really divisive climate right now, with everything happening across the world. Tensions are high. DEI is getting quite a bad reputation in some parts of the world. In some parts of the US, as an example, they're banning DEI initiatives across universities, ridiculously. So I think while some companies are embracing it, many companies will grapple with the challenge of trying to address diverse needs without creating conflict. So like if I think of an example, you might have an initiative aimed at supporting women in the workplace that might focus on increasing maternity leave and benefits around childcare support. But these programs might overlook the specific needs of women of color, who then also face systemic barriers like racial bias when it comes to return to work and performance evaluations or limited access to mentorship opportunities. So I think balancing these intersecting needs, it really requires organizations to go beyond those generic solutions and address the compounded impact that some employees face. And the third and final one, I think, is pay equity beyond transparency. So I always say, like, publishing your pay gap is one thing, fixing it is a completely different ball game. A lot of companies say, oh, we're really proud to publish for the 5th year running our gender pay gap. And then you look at how many women are in leadership, and it's even less than it was the first year that they did the gender pay gap. Excuse me. And so, the reality is really stark. So I'll give you a couple of examples. In the UK, women earn roughly 15% less than men on average. And then bear in mind, we've got another layer of ethnicity pay gap reporting, which impacts women of color even more. In Austria, the gender pay gap stands at just under 19%. So again, significantly less than men. And then in Norway, who actually have quite a good reputation for gender equality, their gender pay gap was last reported at 13%. So we have work to do in these areas, and I think those are the three key things that I see. So DEI fatigue, navigating intersectionality without causing conflict, and pay equity that goes beyond just transparency.
Wow, big challenges, big areas, big challenges.
Not easy.
Yeah, not easy. So what would be the proper way from your experience to tackle these challenges? So I'd like the audience to be left with a sense of empowerment and really rationalize the strategy and take proper steps. So what is the solution? What are some practices or strategies that can actually help to move the needle and address these challenges?
Sure. Okay. So to combat DEI fatigue, I would say really embedding DEI into business strategy. And that's really hard to explain in a short segment like today. But what that means is, make it clear to all your business leaders how inclusive practices drive performance, how it can improve retention and innovation. And I think as well, celebrating the small wins. For me, I always say, I'm working to put myself out of a career. So until DEI jobs are no longer needed, my work isn't done. So until I make myself unemployable, because everyone understands DEI becomes part of company culture, we have work to do. But that also means because we'll never see the finish line, we can get demotivated very quickly. So I think companies really need to celebrate the small wins. They need to be cautiously optimistic, is the phrase I would use. So acknowledge that you've had some great small wins and you're making small progress, but don't deny the fact that there's a wider challenge that still needs to be addressed, and quite a long-term challenge in many of these areas. And then for intersectionality, I think this will sound like not exactly a direct solution, but there's a method to my madness. So for the intersectionality, I think we need to invest in conflict resolution training for a lot of our leaders. And that's because a lot of these DEI discussions come with disagreements and people will clash in the workplace. It can create animosity and tension. But these are also conversations that cannot be avoided. And so a skill that I think is really important for leaders is, helping them understand how to manage conflict between teams. And actually for companies that have ERGs, employee resource groups, those can also help bridge divides by, fostering mutual understanding, having group conversations that are moderated to ensure that everyone's voice feels heard. And then finally, on pay equity, I think technology is your friend. Invest in data analytics tools to really help identify those gaps and prioritize the right actions. So, things like employee engagement surveys, looking at your DEI data across the board, and not just who is in the company. One of the last companies I worked for, we had tons of diversity at application stage, And then it's sort of, once it got to interview, it went down a little bit. And then by the time it got to offer stage, like final interview and offer, there was hardly any diversity. So we realized as a company, we were attracting tons of diverse talent, but it was individual hiring managers whose biases were coming into the process. And then we were left with very similar profiles of people within the organization. So I think data will allow us to remove emotion from that process, and ensure that we're leveraging technology in the best way possible. So yeah, those will be my three ways to solve the three challenges I mentioned.
Okay, and a lot of great practices. So I think the message, the final message to the audience could be just get ready for your own marathon. Be conscious of the resources that you have. Use them in a smart way, and don't be afraid to like change your tactic, right, as you go, because definitely there will be some ups and downs on your 44 point something kilometer.
Yes, exactly. 100%. I think you summarized that so wonderfully, probably better than I would have summarized it. And I think I'll end with just saying, I'm a little biased here because, I'm born and raised in the UK. I think the British way as well is just, disarming people a little bit over like a cup of tea and biscuits, I think, or, fika for those that are in Sweden. Just having these conversations over, a hot beverage, some biscuits, and just being open to hearing one another's life experiences and lived experiences really goes a long way in pushing these conversations forward.
Thank you so much, Tas. Thank you so much for insightful conversation. I wish we had more time. I'm sure we will continue at some point, but thank you so much for your insights and examples that you provided, strategies. I'm sure they will be extremely valuable for the audience. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And if you want to learn how to disarm someone over a cup of tea and biscuits, watch Downton Abbey. Jokes aside, I really loved it. I can't wait until this one is online and we can
What exactly?
rewatch.
Did you love?
Good question. Fair enough. I would say it was packed with thought-provoking statistics. So we could relate to every one of them, how it matters. The sheer irony that a document that was released in 2010, UK Equality Act, is believed by our guests to be the most comprehensive, best document, and it doesn't touch on reality somehow. So you can see the distance between what's on paper and how companies are implementing this. The statistic of PwC that I opened the conference with, only 18% of companies believe that your strategy is mature or well integrated in the company. So imagine it's a test at a university. The answer is you failed at the test. What are you going to do about that? And another one is the metaphor of a marathon. Are we at a place where we've just run the first 10 kilometers and we need an energy snack? I would say that the problem is much deeper, structurally speaking. What about your impressions?
Yeah, I liked it too. And I also liked the metaphor of the cake and cup of tea. For me, cup of coffee. But it is about making people comfortable.
30 more minutes and you will have it, Anna. Don't worry.
Yeah. I can't wait. But for me, it's about our sense of security, of safety in that conversation, giving everyone the voice and feeling comfortable about that. So this is my takeaway from that presentation. Also, a lot of insight from professional point of view. So yeah, very nice. I'm looking at questions and
we have really interesting questions coming. Yeah. Before I go to Jana, if anyone wants to raise their voice following the first two presentations, please raise your hand at some point. Jana, over to you. What do you think about it? Did you like it? Did you enjoy it? Did you learn something new?
There were definitely points that I agree, and one of them that I would like to highlight is the diversity fatigue that we are basically tired, and people who are the D&I passionates, those who really try for years and years to get the buy-in from the rest of the employees, to get the approval from the leadership and support, can get very easily tired. At the same time, the people that for them the whole concept of D&I is more like the modern trend are also tired. So it goes both ways, and I'm happy that the task mentioned that. I would like to use the concept of marathon, which I see in a little bit different way, observing the situation in the Czech market. I feel the first few years it was more the sprint, quick wins.
So it has slowed down now.
And
it's too slow.
I see the marathon as like really the D&I strategy, or whatever we call it, embedded as part of the business and as part of the company culture. So it is a long way. It's not the sprint. It's not the quick wins. It is like really marathon for...
So you want it to be more like a Forrest Gump kind of run? Not...
Yeah, well, beautiful, yes.
I see.
Something like that.
And I think one of the really convincing, beautiful things that I found in this particular speech was the word precision itself. The way this fatigue was described was, of course, marketing, the impact of marketing, performative initiatives, so basically aimed at creating an impression rather than impacting the organization. And then the contradictory factors. You declare one thing, and in reality, when you look in the organization, it's different. Let's get to one of the questions. We have 30 seconds left, not much time.
I was missing one thing in that definition of fatigue.
Okay.
And this is related to our question. It's answering to resistance and dealing with resistance all the time with growing resistance. We have it in one of the questions. It's about woke, cancel culture, ignoring groups other than marginalized ones in discussions. Could resistance or fatigue be a trend? For me, it's not a trend, it's reality. We face it, day by day, and we see it's a growing tendency, but I wouldn't say woke, wouldn't use that word, but wokeism. We started our discussion from that point, that woke has completely different connotation, completely different meaning. So woke cannot be used as a tool to cancel a discussion on diversity and inclusion. Wokeism, yes, for me it's a kind of used to devaluate that.
Anna, from the linguistic perspective alone, it's super interesting. You will not find that many words in the language that in a period of 1 decade would have changed from you're absolutely brilliant to you're an utter complete fool.
Even shorter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do we want to add a word from the audience at this stage, or shall we proceed to our next guest? Now is the time. Would you like to contribute at this point? Or, yeah, right. There you go.
If there is a chance.
Of course.
I just wanted to explore my connotation with the first speech of Nikki, which was about creative tension, which I mentioned, because it was very touching for me when she said that D&I, on one hand, should be disruptive and intrusive, and on the other hand, should be translucent and almost invisible. And I think that both approaches are necessary to make a change. If it will be so embedded that it will be invisible, it can be a threat, that we will not make significant changes and we will not name evil if it happens.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I think now is the time when we really need to proceed to our next guest. Let me invite our next guest, Andres Rodriguez, Iceberg Cultures of Inclusion, joining us now.
Okay, now we're traveling to a distant, warm and exotic Mexico. where I'm joined by my colleague Andres Rodriguez. Andy, great to see you.
Hi,
Hola.
Barbara. How are you doing? Hola.
How are you today?
I am fine. I'm very excited to be here with you today. Thanks for the opportunity. There are lots
Absolutely.
of things going on in Latin America today.
I imagine, and that's one of the reasons why we meet today to discuss some of these dynamics of the Latin America market. And I'm happy that you're joining us for the conversation, but also joining us for the conference. So huge appreciation from our side. But before we get into the three questions, I
Mhm.
should make a proper intro of yourself. So let me just share with the audience that yes, you are connecting from Mexico, but also Andy is with the Iceberg Cultures of Inclusion company, and Andy works as a DEI training and consulting manager. So someone who has a interesting perspective onto the market and onto different clients. And I would like to dive deeper into the Latin America market based on that experience purely. So if you're okay with that approach,
Yeah.
let's just cool. Let's just dive into the first question, like a generic one, so that the audience can better understand what's really happening in Latin America. What are we observing? Is anything trending in the DEI landscape? So why don't you share some on that?
For sure, Barbara. Well, Latin America is a very diverse region. We have various cultural, demographic, and even social backgrounds, but each one is different in each of the countries. So we need to take that into consideration. For instance, there has been an increase of awareness in companies regarding the D&I topics. We have observed the parental leaves increasing in Colombia, which is a reference for the region. For instance, the same-sex marriage, which was approved just recently in Chile and in Mexico, or even the abortion decriminalization in Argentina. However, it is important to consider that these topics are also attending some different serious challenges. For instance, according to CEPAL, to the Economic Forums, in Latin America, we are observing 11 femicides per day. So it is one of the most dangerous regions also for women. Regarding other demographic groups, for instance, people with disability, it is calculated that 73% of people with disability are unemployed. That was a number from ELADIS at 2022, but it's similar still nowadays. So it results having some differences of inequality in the region. It is of the Gini coefficients. A good number to consider is that it is for 46.2% along all the region. So attending to these topics, to all the things that are going on, I would say is the most important thing so far for the NI teams and HR and any organization.
Absolutely. And just like you said, the more complex the region, the greater the challenges.
Mhm.
So I'd like to actually dwell on that a little bit and ask you, what would you consider or pinpoint as a key challenge for 2025? As you know, this is the current situation. Obviously, different markets deal with different challenges, but what are some key challenges that you foresee for 2025 so the industry can get ready?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would say that one of the main challenges is to actually prevent and make the proper strategies, policies, and protocols to attend and prevent a situation of harassment at work. Not just a gender harassment, but to protect every member of our society. In this sense, it is important for companies to have trustful and transparent processes because sometimes even the people in HR or in the D&I committees don't know how to properly attend. It is also important to actually take the proper disciplinary actions when they identify a case because it is common to find these untouchable profiles in every company where people are doubtful on how to proceed or if there should be a consequence. But it is important to have so because it sends a message to the rest of the company.
Absolutely.
I would also tell you, Barbara, that in this sense, it's important to seek strategic alliances within the rest of the ecosystem, not just the legal part, but also, for instance, NGOs and other organizations who actually can help people understand the problematics by themselves because they are complex situations. For instance, in this case, when we are talking about harassment or violence, discrimination, there's a cultural shift that we need to focus in Latin America because countries, some people tend to avoid conflict. We don't like to talk about these topics, but it is important to foster this awareness in every level of the organizations and to actually have the proper sensitivity to address the issues, to talk about the topics, and to make the proper actions to prevent them.
Yes, listen, from all that you listed, we would arrive to the same end stop. So there is kind of discomfort, kind of resistance, maybe still some lack of awareness or limited awareness. So my next question would be how to deal with that as we're looking to becoming more effective and actually investing in rational and sensible steps. So how to take this step and what are specific strategies or tactics that can take you from that, let's be honest, discomfort level to maybe not comfort level but actionable position.
That's a very good question, Barbara. I would say that one of the key aspects to consider is to truly involve the leaderships, the executives, the people who actually maybe has the power to take the decisions to get invested in the topics. Because to be honest, some of us, what we do is prepare this DNI business case where we talk about innovation, where we talk about creativity, but it is also important to consider what could be the social, the economic cost of not complying to a D&I perspective, right? For instance, when we are talking about executives' allyship, we need to create a proper space for them to understand the reality of what is happening in the communities, to actually invest in sustainability also, but not just in the green aspect of the ecology of sustainability, but also to consider the impact that we are making in our society, in our communities, and also to integrate the whole ecosystem in it, not just to work on diversify the workforce inside the organization, but also to consider the supply chain value, to consider customers, because that's what it makes the whole strategy more active and more impactful, yeah, for all of these topics. Finally, Barbara, I would say that it is also important to start addressing the fear to talk about these topics, not just at an executive level, but also within the same organization as well, to actually start raising the issues, to start attending all the topics that are happening and address the problems. Because what is common is to hear them in the different spaces of the cafeteria, in informal conversations, but actually put them into action and to make a proper strategy for all of it.
Yeah. So in other words, not staying at the surface, but having a courage, but also attentiveness to go deeper, right? To really get to the roots of the
Yes,
challenge, what's on people's mind and what's in people's heart.
yeah,
If you want to really move the needle, I
I
absolutely
agree
agree
on
with
you.
that. Um,
Thank
wow, that's a lot of useful advice and valuable tactics, and I hope that a lot of people in our audience will um, either experiment with it or test it in their own fields, and hopefully they will be helped in that way to be on a good track and enter 2025 ready and resourced and aware of what's happening in their region. So. Andy, I wish we could have another few minutes. I know that we are time limited, but I'm sure we will continue this conversation after the conference. So I think with this, I want to thank you so much.
Thank you,
Absolutely. I want to thank you for
Barbara.
taking your perspective, your insights, and let's continue the dialogue. So thank you so much again.
Yes, for sure. Thank you for having me, and let's the conversation going. I would just like to say that these kind of efforts are very valuable, and this is the opportunity to start talking about it and don't losing the effort and to actually recognize our efforts. So that's a very big step also. Thank you very much, Barbara.
Well said. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andres. Thank you, Basha. This made me think about one of the questions that we got from the audience earlier, implying that the low-hanging fruit stage is over. Now the conversation is a lot more tricky. What are you going to do about that?
Actually, I wanted to reflect on
Please
Andreas,
do, please
because
do.
I think lots of interesting points, but it looks like the Chinese menu, you know, what is needed to be done. My question is how. I think we share similar challenges, but really going to the companies and like one of them was to have the strategies, to have the protocols, to be transparent, and so many things in one go. I had that feeling from his talk.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anna, anything you would like to contribute?
No, I don't know. I have some kind of reflections that it's still the discussion about the same topic, about the authenticity, about embedding diversity and inclusion into the every sphere of the company's life, about empowering leaders to do what they should do. So a lot of complex things we really need to resolve. And yeah, the question is, where are we? On which stage we are on that road?
Let me first check if we have a voice from the audience at this stage, or if we don't. If you'd like to say something, please raise your hand. Otherwise, you will be forced to listening to my comment. No comments, no questions so far. This reminded me, our conversation so far from the beginning of this conference, of another TEDx talk. I mentioned Jennifer Brown and Springfield. There's another from Simon Sinek talking about what he calls a golden circle of first answer your why, then how and what. So I believe the DEI conversation today suffers from not understanding that it has talked too much about why. And it's all about why. And when it comes to how, and being able to prioritize the how part, this is the part missing, because people really find it difficult to relate. And we also have statistics to prove that, saying that companies themselves are unconvinced. 1/5 only, say, is mature or well integrated. That says a lot. Assuming we even have a margin of error in this statistic. Call it 15%, but it would still be.
I wouldn't say that they are not convinced. I would say that maybe it really takes time to become mature and become truly inclusive. So it's not a very easy thing. And sometimes I see that we really need years to change anything, to really see significant changes that would reflect the workplace and the working conditions and could be visible for people. So these are those high-hanging fruits, if we refer to the question. yeah, I think that we did the easy job so far. So, yeah, but we only scratched the first layer. Then we need to dig a little bit deeper and start asking deeper and start asking questions. Why is that? What we can do with that, and involve people, involve our staff to that discussion.
All right.
And then, because I have the experience in that, then we really need to be open to listen to and face very difficult questions.
So tell me, where are we in that respect? Are we at a stage where we already have a very tall ladder and all we need to do is to go to the orchard and pick those fruits? Or are we at a stage where we're still looking for the right wood to build the ladder?
Well, if I observe the meta level, I would say that we are in the middle of the road, but it's very individual.
Paintwork. I see. Okay.
Yeah. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Jana?
I wanted to pinpoint one thing that Andras was saying, and it was about the regions. I am more and more aware that we are too much Pragocentric in my country. The situation, the understanding, maybe not questioning why, but finding this how, is very different Prague or when you go to different regions. So I think this is talking about low-hanging fruits or high hanging fruits. It's like a job that we start from almost scratch in the regions.
Yeah, I also have the experience, and let me, for the assessment, evaluation, I would say, that if we are working with BPOs or, business that serves for another business, it's diversity and inclusion is easy and nice thing to do. But when we go, out of bigger cities, or when we work with production, we work with industry, heavy industry, then we meet really different challenges. And I think this is what it's going to be about. Yeah, because those companies are coming into play.
They certainly are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And finally they are, and I'm happy with that. But they bring really different challenges for us, for the leaders in those companies, but also for us who are working in that matter.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you, Jana. And now over to our last guest in this blog, Gitanjali Ganapati, India.
Okay, welcome everyone who is interested in learning what is shaping DEI market in India. I'm joined by Gigi, a co-founder and director at Orquid. Gigi and her team creates inclusive employment for neurodivergent people. I'm more than happy to have you in our conversation. Gigi, hello, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. How do you say hello in your language? Let's just inject some real diversity here.
Hello, I would say still hello because we speak a lot of English, but
Uh-huh.
India has a lot of languages, so it would be namaste.
Namaste, right? Okay, let's start with that. Let's start with namaste and hello. So again, nice to have you with us, and let's kick off this short yet insightful conversation. So, Gigi, in our earlier talks, in our earlier conversations, you mentioned that neuro inclusion appears to be more and more significant for India and for Indian employers and businesses. So, considering that, what's your perspective or experience as of the key challenges for businesses for 2025? What would this be?
So, thank you for having me again. There is an increased interest in neurodiversity in India, particularly among corporates. So there are companies that want to practice neuro inclusion but don't know where to start, especially given the regional context. Others have hired but are struggling to sustain their efforts. And then there are those who have taken steps to sustain but can't scale. These three areas pretty much sum up the challenges. Challenge one is developing programs keeping the regional context in mind. Challenge two is sustaining the existing neurodivergent workforce. And challenge three would be scaling up and moving beyond pilot programs. Let me, I can go ahead and expand on the first challenge, which is the regional context. So, historically, neuro inclusion programs in India, particularly those by multinationals, are often extensions of their global programs, primarily from the US. What works there doesn't always work here. For example, neurodivergents in India who have computer science or engineering degrees often mask their neurodivergence due to the stigma attached to, saying that you're neurodivergent, to unmask. So while the coding space might include many neurodivergents, very few really feel safe enough to disclose. And additionally, neurodivergents with visible differences are often routed into special schools that don't provide the education needed to pursue such careers. These realities highlight why programs need to be tailored for India's unique context, not simply replicated from other regions.
Right.
And challenge two is sustaining the existing neurodivergent workforce. When Orquate started 3 years ago, we saw many companies eager to hire neurodivergents. Now, that was not the problem. The problem was that the instinct was to start with hiring. That approach often led to failures. We had to decline clients who weren't ready to build the necessary pre hiring infrastructure or offer post hiring support. Many companies have since learned that hiring is just one part of the process. Sustaining a neurodivergent workforce requires inclusive hiring practices, continuous workplace accommodations, and ongoing support systems. I can move to challenge three,
Please
which
go
is
ahead.
scaling. For companies that have addressed sustainability, the next big question is how do we scale? Many businesses have neurodivergence scattered across departments in small numbers, single digits or the low double digits. But scaling neuro inclusion to levels that impact the organization's culture and bottom line is a significantly different challenge altogether. It's about integrating neurodivergence into the core workforce at significant numbers while staying true to the cause of inclusion and not diluting its purpose. To address these challenges, businesses must move beyond isolated efforts. Neuro inclusion needs to be part of a long term systemic strategy that's rooted in India's realities, focused on sustainability, and designed to scale thoughtfully. Starting small is fine, but the key is to have a roadmap for growth that aligns DEI with the broader business outcomes. I hope that
Wonderful.
answers your question.
It does, it does, and I believe it's not accident that you have you've almost created like a 3S model, 3S challenge model. You mentioned starting, sustaining, and scaling, and it almost sounds like it's a one big challenge, it's a one big process challenge, or one big system challenge. So, considering these stages of the process, so Gigi, from your perspective, and I know it's a massive, massive challenge or challenges, what would you say is a key practice or number one practice that you would recommend to businesses of across industries? What would you name as a key best practice to tackle this?
First one would be start from the inside out. Y- You don't need to hire neurodivergence from outside. Studies show that 1 in 7 people in any population are neurodivergent. This means companies already have a significant number of neurodivergent employees. They just might not know it. The
Yes,
first
so
step
it's
is
almost,
creating an environment. Mhm.
yeah, it's almost like, so you're saying to tackle this start issue, or the challenge that employers are facing, just look at your current pool, look inside, and that could be a good solution to
Look
tackle the first
inside,
challenge.
practically and metaphorically, right? You look inside yourself and you look inside the company. So start from the inside. So the first step is create an environment where your employees feel safe enough to disclose their neurodivergence, safe enough to unmask. How do you do that? You start with awareness programs and workshops. Have neurodivergence from within or outside the company share their lived experiences, offer coaching support, and form neurodivergent led employee resource groups, the ERGs. And these have to be neurodivergent led. So once you've built that foundation, neurodivergent hiring can become a natural next step and which can be sustainable. So, and I'd probably build on that. Coaching is critical here. Offer customized coaching for neurodivergence, their managers, and their teams. This isn't really a one size fits all training. It's about understanding individual needs and creating structures to support them. So at Awkward, most of our work right now focuses on this. And we've seen it make a world of difference in fostering inclusion and retention. The next big challenge was scaling. Now, to scale effectively, companies need to identify career tracks that match the strengths of neurodivergent talent. For example, many neurodivergents who come to us haven't had access to higher education, but excel in areas like problem solving and pattern recognition. And for this group, we have identified a stream in AI, data annotation for computer vision, which is basically you're creating training data for AI, as a viable career track. This particular one is language agnostic and aligns with their strengths. So, with the support, the success, I'll tell you how this is successful. So, with the support of the NASCOM Foundation, we have reached a stage we are now training 150 neurodivergents in this field. This targeted approach has worked well and is a great example of aligning strength with opportunity. 150 in this space is a big number because corporates, MNCs, are talking in terms of single digits to the low double digits. And we are talking 150, 150 at a go. And finally, representation is key. So I often attend DEI conferences or roundtables where the topic is neuroinclusion, but I am the only neurodivergent person in the room. That really doesn't work. You can't have meaningful discussions or create effective policies for a group without really including their voices. True inclusion requires having neurodivergence involved at every stage, from planning to implementation. So, by
Right.
focusing on these steps, building from within, offer tailored support, scaling thoughtfully, and ensuring representation, companies can address these challenges and create workspaces where neurodivergence can truly thrive.
Well, thank you. So I asked you for one challenge, but you gave me 3+, and I'm pretty sure we could build up that list. Thank you so much, Gigi. I realized it was a short conversation, but hopefully still eye-opening for a lot of members in the audience. This topic is definitely not leaving our radar, our meaning Poland and Europe. I hope nobody's radar, to be honest. And I do hope to continue this conversation with you in a near future. So thank you so much for sharing your experience and insights, and hope to talk soon. Thank you.
Happy to share my insights, and thank you for this.
Thank you, Gitanjali. Thank you, Basha. And we are back in the studio for the final quick summary. Anything that surprised you the most so far?
No, it didn't surprise me at all, but it was the first presentation that mentioned emerging trend. Because so far we've been discussing about challenges we observed and we are going to face. But neurodiversity is really an emerging trend we see, and we see growing interest in that field, and we see also a huge field that we have a lot of job to do in that field, right? Because companies are not well equipped in solutions. That's one, and also culturally not so developed to deal with that.
Speaking of emerging trends, let me ask you this. How important is it in your respective organizations to compare your key data points around key things like pay gap? We heard Taz mentioning 15% for the UK. Jana mentioned her percentage, probably compared it to Poland at some point. How important is it to look for those insights, like really internationally? What does it give you?
For me, we work a lot with companies that are multicultural, multinational. So this is one thing that I really appreciate, and I see the value of discussing on that level. Also for looking for the inspiration or looking for some solutions we can use or we can bring to our clients, and also to be prepared to ask their questions, because our clients ask for that solution and they are interested what's going on.
But in terms of Anna, in terms of your lobbying power, for instance, if you need to interact with the government to push the policy upwards, so to say, and create meaningful change, does it help you if you find interesting statistics from across the continent or elsewhere?
Well, we always use benchmarking for justifying what we do. So, and it's also one of our strategy to keep organization interested in the topic, to bring that perspective. That look, all of them are doing this, and you not. So it's time. It's really high time.
So the lobbying angle is very important here. Jana, how about you? Czech Republic. Do you sometimes use examples from Poland or other countries in Europe to push internally for Czech Republic things that somehow refuse to change for the better at the right pace?
I definitely agree that having data is like the foundation, is the baseline. There are a number of surveys. Unfortunately, there are not these general surveys on this profitability and teamwork, etc. For the Central Eastern Europe, there are some surveys. But I completely agree. It's like the arsenal that you have, the arguments that you can give and have it supported by the data. Going back, reflecting to Gigi, if I can, I am actually very surprised that, and I learned something that in India, the neurodiversity and neurodivergent topic is such an alarming and an emerging trend as we said here, and it brings me back to, she mentioned it's the stigma and how the companies work with it.
Gigi literally said that very few people feel safe enough to disclose. That was the exact wording. So that may be.
And that's the psychological safety that we talk about. And what I love about this global look with the lenses into different regions, and we had here the UK and India and America, is what is stigma in that particular region? Is it in my region that me being the working mom? Is it the stigma that the divorce that I am going through, is it the stigma being handicapped? So like really, it maybe brings us back to the first interview that we had and the question that was raised there. Let's go back to the basics and let's really talk about people's needs. How do you find out what do I need in the company if I don't feel psychologically safe, if I feel that my job will be jeopardized? So it is a long way. It's the marathon, as I said.
And it's quite shocking, isn't it, that people find such obvious concepts so difficult to imagine. If you don't feel psychologically safe, which is really a foundation of anything, then how can you talk about motivation, commitment, attrition rate in a company, loyalty, all these concepts? Engagement. Yeah. How can you even start this conversation if you don't understand the basics of how someone feels in a workplace?
I don't have the answer.
At the same time,
difficult.
At the same time, I suppose it's fair to reverse this question when you think about it. To be somewhat provocative, you could say you can reverse inclusion and say there will always be people, and perhaps rightly so, who don't expect all this complexity from the workplace. All they want to do is to respect their colleagues at work, do the job, go home where the real life is, and they are fed up with all of the complexity of the conversation. They just want to focus on work. That's one perspective.
Yeah, but remember that all our inclusive efforts never make any loss to people who don't want to use it and who don't want to, benefit from that system.
True, but they're all invited and engaged, and that's the buzz in the company. That's
but if it's Jana, if it's authentic, then it's engaging. Yeah, it's truly engaging. So
and we have the statistics how engaging that is. So that's I guess one of the challenges for the future. I wish we had more time.
But no, I have to say
Please.
Like, if they are the people who want to go home, do the job, go home, nothing to do with that, fine, respect it. But if you act in the workplace in a way that you harm other people, and you don't want to learn, you are disrespectful, then I'm sorry.
Exactly.
So
we all agree on everything said so far. I wish we had more time. It's been fascinating to talk to you and listen to our guests' perspectives. Does our audience want to conclude with a statement, perhaps, before we... There you go.
You mentioned following other companies that are looking into the practices of neurodivergence. I think that can become an advantage. Instead of looking to others, be the leader that says, I'm not looking at other companies, I'm taking that into consideration, putting in practices, looking at, let's take ADHD, for example, the access to water, the access to, not having all the distractions around. That can become a competitive advantage. And I think it should just become part of the DNA of the company instead of just a buzzword and instead of just something that everybody's all over right now because it just became a trend to follow.
Such a super important voice. If you're a follower,
I think it's
you will end up with
it's a great conclusion after our session, because we all agree what you say,
And in this way, Anna single-handedly decided we are cutting off the rest of you in case you have any comments or questions. Jokes aside.
Do we have time? You mentioned that we don't.
We don't. Any final voice? Anyone?
Thank you. I actually have a comment. I'm thinking that it may be controversial, but I think that for so many years we were trying to talk about globalization and becoming global and implementing global practices and global standards, while it clearly, it was very clear today that the needs are very local. So I think that one of the key challenges will be sort of reversing from this super global mindset to asking ourselves, okay, how do we act locally? How do we adjust to local nuances? And that's
beautiful. Thank you so very much. Now that we've established we absolutely have no time left, anyone final voice? No one? Thank you so very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Jana, thank you for taking the trouble to travel all the way to Kraków in early winter.
It was my pleasure.
Anna,
thank you.
It wasn't a massive journey for you, I suppose.
No, only 1 hour from my home.
But thank you nevertheless.
Kraków is small and huge in the same time.
And thank you to our wonderful audience, the very first